I've never been able to just turn it off and just think, you know what, this tastes good. It doesn't even matter if suffering happened.
Hi, I'm Rodney.
I'm Alexis.
And this is The Vegan Agenda.
If you find this video informative, interesting, enjoyable, or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share.
My name is Angela Hatcher and I live in Austin, Texas. I have been vegan for 2.5 years. I started off as a vegetarian when I was 13 years old. My family made us practice Lent and I decided to give up eating meat because I was that annoying kid in kindergarten that would always say, I want to be a vegetarian when I grow up. So I gave up meat, and then Easter came and my mom offered me some ham and I said, no, you know what? I'm good. I never ate mammals again, and then I realized it was oxymoronic to eat fish. So I ended up stopping eating them at 18. I always was curious about veganism, but I never really understood the kind of pain that goes into collecting dairy and eggs. I thought that there was a nice way to do it. But after seeing just exactly what I was supporting by spending my money on the dairy industry, I decided to cut that out, and I feel a lot better. Cutting out dairy was one of the best things for my health, honestly. I was inspired by the animals. I always cared a lot about animals, and that's what made me stop eating meat. My dad hunted as I was growing up, so I always saw that the meat was a creature, and it always bothered me, but I was taught that it was right, so I kind of followed along with it until when I was about 10, I had an identity crisis about who I was and if I go to heaven and why I'm going to heaven and my dog isn't going to heaven, even though honestly my dog is probably a better creature than I am. And I just kind of realized that the way I see the world, that animals and humans aren't better than or less than. We're all just alive and we all have that right to life. When I stopped eating dairy, immediately things like my period got lighter, a lot of my PMS symptoms and things like that just went away. My acne disappeared.
You used to have acne?
Yeah.
You look like you've never had a blemish in your life.
Thank you. It's the dairy. It's the lack of dairy. I stopped bloating as much. I just feel more confident in my body. I feel like I have more control in a way because I'm not eating and then suddenly feeling really tired and bloated and just kind of wondering why. I truly believe that one of the scariest situations in my life, which was when I lost an ovary, was due to me eating dairy and caffeine. I looked it up, and one of the main causes of ovarian cysts is excessive dairy intake, excessive caffeine intake. And at the time I was vegetarian, living on a bag of potatoes and cheese. I was very poor. I was going to school full time and paying for it and working full time, and it was just a hard time. So I was eating a lot of dairy, drinking a lot of caffeine because it was right before finals. And then I ended up in the ER because I couldn't breathe and I had been bleeding internally, and it was this whole thing. There's no way to go back and prove exactly what caused it, but I truly believe that dairy contributed to that. It's hormones, it's breast milk. People are concerned about the estrogen in tofu, but they forget to think about the estrogen in breast milk that they drink. I work at a preschool where the kids are required to drink a glass of milk with every single meal. And it's just so concerning for me to watch these kids intaking all these hormones and fats. There's so many healthier things. I watched Cowspiracy, and that was the thing that helped me go vegan. The thing that got me about Cowspiracy was when it told you that when you buy dairy, the baby cows can't drink it. So they're going to die. So even though I was vegetarian, I thought, oh, I'm not killing any animals, I'm just taking the extra product. I'm not. I'm taking away a baby's food, and we're directly contributing to the veal industry, whether or not you buy veal. That was my big motivation. A lot of benefit, the environmental aspects and all the other things about it. But for me, it was always just about letting living things live their lives. When I cut out meat, my reasoning was just letting living things continue. But when I went vegan, I just felt so much better, and I started doing research into why I felt better all of a sudden. And I just found out how much better it is for people in general, both environmentally and health-wise, for them to stop eating dairy as a whole. I always make the joke that I'm vegetarian for the animals, but I'm vegan for the health and the environment. I have craved cheese. I really want something cheesy. You know, I buy the dairy shreds and they don't melt the exact same way, but I've never caved. I've never gone back to it because I just remember how I felt, and I remember the way that it made my body react. And it was just acne and stress, and A sense of self-preservation has kept me away from dairy. When first learning about veganism, one can compare veganism and plant-based because they have a similar diet. The difference appears that vegans care about the suffering that their food causes. There's some sort of thing other than themselves that a vegan is motivated towards. Not to negate the benefit of being plant-based, but people who are plant-based are in it for their health or to gain muscle or to convenience or something like that, whereas a vegan is in it for the animals and to minimize suffering and the world around them. I do my best to try to be vegan in everything I do. I do think it's a learning process. I try to exclude as many things that cause suffering as I can. That includes makeup, hair products, and things such as that. When I first went vegan, I just cut out food and I never used leather because of the vegetarian aspects. But then when I started noticing, animal testing, I can't say that I don't want animals to suffer, but I'm wearing this stuff that makes me feel pretty, and that's pretty much the only benefit to it. I feel like one could argue there are gray areas with medication or things that might save lives, but things like makeup and your nails and the food you eat, the costs outweigh the benefits. I have not done very much research into nail polish, but that is something that I would really like to look more into. I think it's so important for people not to get angry at people when they do things that aren't vegan, when they claim to be vegan, but kind of say, hey, I know that you're trying to minimize suffering. Just so you know, your nail polish could be a source of that. Before I went vegan, I honestly always thought vegans were too extreme. I didn't realize the real suffering that happened from the dairy industry. My logic was always that there's a way to do it well. So we shouldn't be fighting the product, we should be fighting the practices. And I do have some level of respect for that because at least it's a recognition that there's a problem. It's still encouraging that suffering is going to keep happening until you get the right way of doing it. A problem that I had when I first started thinking about going vegan, I didn't understand it, but I liked that they were based on a lot of the same principles I had, which was minimizing suffering, right to life for animals. So I tried to reach out on some vegan Facebook pages, and I was met with a lot of criticism just by asking, saying, I don't quite understand this. Can you help me out? I asked, why do you guys not eat dairy? And they said, because people who eat dairy are terrible. It was just a lot of attacks. So I feel that it's very important for vegans to try to present themselves in an informative way rather than a negative way, even though I completely understand when I see someone eating a burger, I want to shout like, that was an animal, you took its life. But at the same time, that's not how someone would respond. I feel that people respond that way because we're so passionate. We want to end the suffering. We want people to see things how we see them. And in our minds, it already makes sense. We've made those connections. So it just seems so obvious. But to someone on the outside, these things that a lot of people haven't thought of their whole lives don't make sense. So it's just an interesting interaction because you understand both sides. You understand the passion behind the veganism and you understand the ignorance of someone who just grew up with their dad hunting in the backyard and they never realized something was wrong. I would definitely recommend doing some personal research. At the time, I wasn't aware of how to get this information besides asking vegan Facebook pages and things like that. I would definitely get a basic level of understanding from the documentaries we have out now. I've heard a lot about Dominion. I love Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. I tried to show that one to my parents. They liked the information, but they also were like, this seems pretty extreme. I am the only vegetarian, vegan, anything like that. My mom didn't like it very much when I went vegan. She made a big deal. You're going to have to cook for yourself. And I said, fine. And I ate a lot of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I currently live with my fiance here in Texas, but I lived with her until I was 20 years old. When I first went vegetarian, my parents weren't exactly thrilled about it, but after I started making my own food and proving that I was going to stick to my guns and do this, my dad actually had a lot more respect for it than my mom did at first. My dad was a hunter. I told him, I don't think I could go out and hunt an animal. I don't think I have any right to eat anything that I can't kill myself. We have a lot of respect for that. He hates the torture and the waste that happens in the meat industry. He still thinks that it's okay to consume, but the way that we consume is wrong. And I think that there's a lot of progress in that alone, just growing up. He grew up on a farm and he hunted his whole life, and hunting is a family thing. He still goes hunting with his dad. My mother, on the other hand, just did not seem to like it, and then she kind of accepted it, and then she was like, "You're still doing this? It's been years." So she's accepted it as who I am. She tries really hard. She posts a lot of things on my Facebook page like, "We don't eat meat on Mondays because meat is bad for your health." And I say, "Yes, that's great. That's a good start." And sometimes it's hard not to say, like, it's bad for you. Why don't you just not eat it? It's progress. And I feel just being vegan and sticking to your guns and just leading by example rather than preaching is the best way to try to convince others to follow the lifestyle. My fiance is not vegan. He does eat meat and everything. It does bother me sometimes. It kind of keeps me humble. It reminds me to see the other side and to not walk around saying, "Screw everyone who eats meat. They're all terrible people," because it's so easy to think that. I want to remember that people can be good and do bad things or things that hurt other living beings. People can have good and bad in them. And I'm not saying that people who eat meat are bad or anything like that, but I do see the process of contributing to the killing of animals as a inherently negative thing. I had a roommate who always would say, "No, you're right. Vegans have the higher moral ground on eating meat, but some of us just don't care." He himself was interesting because he was the type who would sit around and say, "I wish I was vegetarian. Vegetarians are right." And my fiance would be cooking dinner and say, "Hey, I bought an extra eggplant for Angela, so you can have one too." Or, "I bought a pork chop." And he would always say, "Pork chop." And all of us living together would say, "You say you want to be vegetarian." Some people are very comfortable in their hypocrisy. They can recognize it and just choose to continue living blindly. But I know for a fact that my roommates, including my fiance, eat a lot less meat because I live with them. Some days Jake just won't feel like making extra food, so he'll just make an extra eggplant and we'll all just eat vegan that day. I usually don't go in the kitchen too much, especially when meat is being cooked, but when I have cooked my own food at the same time as him. He works in a restaurant and has for years, and so have I. So we're very good about cross-contamination and not letting, no spatulas, or like if a pan has meat, like it has to be washed really well. But we do use the same stove, different cutting boards and things like that, but I do get close to it. It's like a horror movie in a way. You want to look at it even though you don't want anything to do with it. My fiance has learned the information and he just doesn't, I don't know what it is. I think it's just the idea that it's okay for humans to take the life of other beings. And I think that's an idea that a lot of people have, and I'm not sure how to get around that. We've known each other for 10 years. I think it's good for vegans to remain informed of the other side so they can better reach the people that they're talking to also. And it's interesting to see or be in a situation such as today. My job did a crawfish boil. So all the kids gathered together and played with the crawfish, and I was trying to teach them all, like, look, he's friendly. They were putting their claws up, scared, but I was saying, they're waving to you. And we touched them, we played with them, and I teach my students to be very empathetic towards animals, and I see that happening. My students will catch them and let them go now. Things like that. But while we were doing this, my boss said, "Oh, they're about to meet their doom soon." And I was, it's interesting to be in that situation and just see the ways people justify it and see if there's anything to work with there. The one thing that I kind of said to a couple of coworkers was the process by which they're killed is at least something we could both agree should be better. And I think that that's opening a door to better treatment of animals as a whole, even if it's just starting at something small, like maybe we shouldn't boil them alive. I have bought food for other people in my household and for myself, but I don't buy meat, period. I have bought cheese, but I usually ask to be paid back. But I will not go to the store and buy meat. I just can't. I'm an unhealthy vegan. On an ideal, typical day where I get up and I do what I would like to do, I would start my day off with a smoothie or something of the sort, maybe a bagel with nutritional yeast. One of my favorite breakfasts is avocado and nutritional yeast on a toasted bagel. It's great. And then for lunch I usually find some place to go out because I always forget to bring lunch, but there's a lot of ways to make vegan food at restaurants. You just have to know that they're trustworthy enough with their food to kind of figure that out. And here in Austin, you can usually tell much better than up in Chicagoland where I'm from. And for dinner, Jake usually will cook a lot of vegetables, so we'll have Brussels sprouts and squash, and I'll usually have eggplant or squash as the main entree, or potatoes, mashed potatoes or roasted potatoes. And I would definitely recommend trying to see if you could find something ahead of time. Sometimes that's not possible, or sometimes you just don't want to be that guy to say, I need to check to see if this restaurant has food for me. So if that's not an option, you should definitely check the sides first if it's a restaurant that you think might not have options, like a barbecue restaurant or something. Otherwise, see if you can modify things. I remember when I was vegetarian, not vegan yet, they had shrimp fettuccine, and I didn't want the shrimp, so I said, could I replace it with a bunch of vegetables? Things like that, just kind of getting creative, being reasonable with the staff. It's not their fault if you have to switch out certain foods and they cost more. Usually they don't, because, cheese and meat costs more than vegetables, so you usually can win on that. Just keep an open mind, get creative, and talk to the waitstaff. My number one concern with eating out in restaurants, though, is don't say you're vegan. Say you don't eat meat, and say you're lactose intolerant. Because if you say you're vegan, they don't care quite as much as if you say you're lactose intolerant, from my experience in restaurants. Because vegans want to disrupt something that's so ingrained in American society, the idea of eating meat, the hot dog, the hamburger, that's what people think of when they think of American dining. We want to change that, so I feel that makes a lot of people uncomfortable and makes people kind of see us as crazy or others, or they might see one mean vegan and assume all vegans are just not kind and they don't take it as seriously. I have never had anyone necessarily say anything negative to me, but I have gone into restaurants and said, hey, I don't eat dairy or meat, what can you do for me? And I've had waitresses say nothing. And that's when I walk out of the restaurant. Most of the time they'll try to say, maybe can you do the pasta with this dressing? Oh, I can't do this pasta sauce, let's do a different. They'll usually work with you, but if they just shoot you down, they're not trying to work with you, just leave. I think being vegan is the same as any other diet, in which it can be expensive if you get things that are excessive. A vegan diet can just consist of a bunch of fruits and vegetables and maybe some quinoa and, as I said, bagels. These are things that people buy regularly for cheap. Those extra things that I buy as a vegan, such as fake meats, you could argue they replace the cost of regular meats. I would say the best way to feed the family on low income for a vegan diet would be go to basics. Rice and beans is a complete protein. You get all 26 amino acids there. So if you're worried about protein, you've got that. Vegetables don't necessarily take a lot of time depending on how you cook them. I usually fry and saute stuff. You could roast them. You could turn the oven on, put some oil on top, go do the laundry, whatever else you have to do, and come back an hour later and you have a meal. If you're on a fixed income, try to stick to plants. And I personally try to ban things like lettuce, as an example, personally, because I try to get macronutrients and vitamins. Like, I know B12 is one that I have to worry about, so I always try to use some nutritional yeast every once in a while, flaxseed for omega-3s. Before I went vegan, I wish that I had known that being vegetarian wasn't eliminating the killing that happens in our farming industry. When I was vegetarian, I wanted to eliminate suffering and killing things, and I just didn't realize that dairy did so much of that. It made perfect sense with what my beliefs were, but I was just so blind. I've been a nurse assistant. I'm a teacher right now. We get drilled into us that milk is necessary. I always rejected that protein was necessary, but You always hear about milk, milk, milk. As I mentioned, my students need to have milk with every single meal we serve them. That's the government, and that's what we have to do in order to feed our students. That's our food bill. They give us money only if we give them dairy with every meal. The problem with eggs primarily is how we harvest eggs. Chickens are being bred at rapid rates in terrible conditions, and they're laying eggs, and they need the nutrients to replace those eggs. Commonly, people that own pet chickens will feed back their chickens their own eggs because that's what they do in the wild to get back all those nutrients that they lost. Because they basically made half a baby there. That is all the nutrients you need for a baby and that the chicken just lost. And we feed them cornmeal and starve them. There's an anecdote in Temple Grandin's book, Animals in Translation, about raping roosters, which is a problem that's happened from the way that we breed chickens to get larger, and also chickens that lay eggs, as we do. The male rooster stopped doing what he needs to do to attract a mate and instead just started trying to mate with the female, and she struggled and tried to get away, and it was just this entire generation of hens that just killed each other because we just bred them at these rapid rates so that we could keep their eggs and take their meat, and we destroyed a whole generation. We just messed with genetics to a point that these animals could no longer be what they inherently were. While I was dependent on my parents for food, a lot of the food that we ate had meat and dairy on it. It was never really questioned. When I started going vegetarian, I think my parents noticed too that they could easily eliminate this. And that's something that I do even as a vegan is if I want to have like a steak and potatoes dinner, I'm not going to have the steak, but I'm going to have the potato still, I'm going to have the Brussels sprouts still, and I'm going to have an eggplant. I do like eggplant. As a result of my vegan lifestyle, the first thing that I noticed was health. The usual, I stopped getting acne, I stopped bloating, everything like that. After that, I started just being more mindful of everything that I do. I now consider nail polish isn't cruelty-free. Like, that's why? There's so much unnecessary suffering in the world. It's made me really sad to see it, but I'm glad that I know so I can do my part in preventing it and minimizing it. I think it's a lot easier to just say, I just want some cheese. I've met people who said, oh yeah, I was vegan for 6 months, then I decided I wanted some steak. On some level, I wish I could just choose that ignorance and just stop hearing the screams of all the animals in my head. But it's kind of a blessing. I can't. It's not something that I can get rid of. I can't just choose to ignore the consequences of my actions. Dementia has been linked to red meat consumption, meat in general, but especially red meat because of the plaques. I was working at a nursing home and they had to have meat and milk with every meal, and I'm like, I swear these women are getting worse dementia because you are giving them all this stuff that's just clogging their already clogged arteries in their brain. I feel that despite me being exposed to a lot of meat and dairy consumption at my various jobs, I'm able to try to think of ways to make a difference. I need to come forward and do more to try to speak to higher ups about what's better. Someone needs to go tell the government to stop funding milk. And it goes back to the Great Depression, and it's just this entire hypocrisy of capitalism. It's based on old, no longer relevant information. And I would love to go forward and let people know that in the higher ups to stop these things, because the people lower down are just following the rules. My bosses would probably let me convince the cook to just feed them. If I offered half of my paycheck to buy just like non-dairy milk, I bet they would do it. But the problem is that the government has to fund it. The government has to get involved.
They'd probably still send you the milk and then you'd have to throw it away, right?
Yes. I think if I came forward and said I cannot serve these children milk, I would not have a job anymore. But I think that I want to believe that my bosses would hear me out if we could find a way to substitute the milk. But it would have to be cost effective. And that's the problem, is we do use soy and cashew milk at my job for lactose intolerant children. They still get cheese on their food because for some reason, according to modern dietitians right now, milk has more lactose than cheese does, so we'll just mess up the kids' stomachs a little bit. These aren't the people that wipe these children's making these laws. It's me. I'm sorry.
No, that's a great point.
When I worked in a nursing home, that was like my thought.
Right.
The kids, like, their stomach hurts. Their stomach hurts. I have to deal with this kid for 4 more hours, and they're just like running to the bathroom. They're trying to potty train with a stomach ache because we have to give them dairy. I feel totally healthy. I do not feel weak. I do not feel malnourished. I do not feel deprived. One of my favorite stories about people who knew someone who went vegan was when I was at a family function, and they tried to serve me steak, and I said, no, I don't eat meat. And then they tried to serve me corn with butter on it, and I said, no, I don't eat dairy. And they said, what do you eat? I said, oh, well, I'm vegan. And they said, oh, my daughter went vegan, but she got really sick after a week and had to stop. And I said, what did she eat? And they said, salad. And I said, what was on the salad? And they said, lettuce. And I said, was there anything else? They were like, no, she ate salad. This girl ate salad for a week straight and then got sick. Of course. People who eat the same thing every time, and when they think veganism, think salads, which, by the way, if you make a good salad, they're still good. So when someone goes vegan, they just need to make sure that they eat a variety of foods. Don't just eat salad, eat rice and beans. And there's a Mexican restaurant I called ahead and made sure that they don't serve pork in the beans, which is a secret thing that you have to make sure. The lard. Found a place that doesn't do that, and I go in, and you have to order in Spanish, but I go in and I say, I don't eat meat. Can I get cactus instead of meat? And they'll do it, and you get like the same meal that a meat eater would eat with a different protein. That's all it is just trying to replace the meat, and not to replace it like you should be worried about protein, but to replace it with just something else filling and nutritious. Just eat enough food. I was hungry for like 2 months straight when I first went vegan, but I kept eating. I didn't deprive myself. I just kept eating, and I didn't gain an ounce of weight. My weight fluctuates a lot less now that I'm vegan. The hardest thing about going vegan was cheese withdrawals. And I don't mean like I craved cheese, which I did, but my body did really crazy things. Birth control has a lot of estrogen in it. It tricks your body into thinking that you're pregnant. And when I stopped eating cheese, I still got my period 2 weeks early while I was on the pill. So that means that the amount of estrogen that I was eating in cheese was more than what I was getting from the pill that I was taking that told my body I was pregnant. The one thing that wasn't directly related to the food that concerned me about going vegan was that Jake had always said that he wasn't going to cook for me if I went vegan. He said that it was going to be too much work. He didn't know what he could cook for me because at the time I was eating a lot of eggs and cheese. So one day he was making breakfast and I was like, hey babe, I don't want any eggs. Don't put cheese on it either. And I kept doing things like that until 2 weeks later he's like, so you're vegan now, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he's like, damn it, babe. And he learned how to cook vegan. I haven't stopped doing things with my family now that I'm vegan, but they have had to change in a way. My grandmother has cried when I've been vegetarian because it's so sad because I used to love beef so much, and why don't you love it anymore? And then I stopped eating cheese, and my grandmother was like, what does she eat? She just doesn't know what food exists without cheese or meat in it. So I've had to bring my own food. I felt bad doing it, but say specifically, like, can you just make some vegetables? I don't care what kind of vegetables. Put this vegan version of butter on it. It tastes exactly the same. I'll buy it. I usually try to bring my own food, but it's interesting to try to explain things that seem obviously vegan to someone who just does so unfamiliar with the concept. She literally, her and my fiance both said, what do you eat? What will you eat if you're vegan? I always like to, my parents always talk about how healthy I am now because I'm vegan, because we go visit and we go grocery shopping and I just go to the fresh produce aisle and I'm like, do you guys like cauliflower? Do you guys like broccoli? Do you guys like Brussels sprouts? They're like, we haven't had any of this stuff in like a long time. How do you cook it? My mom asked me how to cook cauliflower, and now she texts me and she says, we love cauliflower stir fries now, thank you. But you just walk through the fresh produce aisle and there's your meal. There's everything you need. And it's so much prettier. It sounds very silly, but it's prettier. The colors. My dad was a hunter, so I watched him slaughter animals on the front lawn. I watched him cut them open, take out the guts, keep the pelt, keep the feathers. So I saw that happening. I didn't see it happening in mass production. I've seen brief clips of it, and I just, honestly, I'm already vegan and I just don't want to watch it. I think it's important for people to see it. That's never been the thing that got me to go vegan, because I feel that, I mean, it did make me go vegan, not wanting that suffering to happen, but having the images shown didn't really make me want to go vegan any more than I already had wanted to, because everyone already knows that the conditions are bad and that the animals get hurt in the slaughterhouses. Some people do really get shocked by it, but I personally was not. I think it's because of my background with my dad hunting that I just, yeah, they hang them up. That's how they drain the blood. That's what they do. I sadly do think that there's a way for people to just decide to stop caring. I don't fully understand how some people can do that, because I've never been able to stop caring. I've never been able to just turn it off and just think, you know what, this tastes good. It doesn't even matter if suffering happened. But I do think some people are capable of just choosing to ignore the thing that they know is right. I do think a lot of the people coming forward were never really ethically based. Finding alternatives would be good. And I don't just mean, find the vegan cheese to replace the cheese, but find what you like about a certain food and try to replace that. My mother always made ham with a lot of clove for Christmas dinner, and that was just always the one meat that I really missed, was ham with clove. It's the saltiness in the clove, and you can find a way to kind of get that same feeling from something else. It's so cool now because there's so many vegan style meats now that you could try to find the non-plant version if you wanted to. Try to find replacements for the things you like based on aspects about the thing you like rather than the thing itself. Rather than trying to replace ham, try to replace the flavors of ham you like or the feeling of ham you like. Once people go vegan, it's amazing how many of them realize that a lot of what they liked about meat was the flavors that were used, and you can use those flavors on things that are not meat.
Because we basically flavor meat with plants.
Exactly. I haven't seen any of those videos. I've heard of them. I do think a lot of them are people that were either just uninformed or just impulsively tried to go vegan and just ate salad for a month. I think that a lot of the people who say that they're no longer vegan just chose the easy way out. I think rather than finding a solution, they might say they were malnourished. Instead of saying, okay, well, let's look at what I'm eating. I'm not getting any carbs. Let me try to fix that. Or I'm getting 1,000 calories as opposed to my normal 2,000. Maybe I just need to eat a lot more than I used to. I think people instead just think, oh, I tried it. Yep, you can't be vegan and healthy. Done. I try to actively promote veganism in my everyday actions. I try to be an example. I try to eat food that looks like it would taste good, that's vegan. I've explained to people, not unprompted, but I've explained to people why I'm vegan. My boss came up to me and asked me, why don't you drink milk? And I said, it's because when you buy milk, you take it away from the babies, and I can't be a part of that. And you can kind of see a look on people's faces when they go, yeah, that makes sense. He looked at me and he said, a lot of thought went into that. He still eats ice cream, but I think the seed is planted. I think one person can make a difference by going vegan, despite the huge numbers that need to change to make a difference, because with each person who goes vegan and leads by example, we're able to help others. Every single person, even if we don't change anyone else, if 1 out of every 100 people just went vegan and didn't talk to anyone else around them about it, that would be amazing. It would be insane. Every single person counts. So even though you're one person, the world is big enough that if just one person decided to take the step to go vegan, we could stop global warming. I think if we all worked together. My vegan philosophy just revolves around the fact that no one creature is greater than another creature. Humans are inherently greater than rabbits or ants or cows or dogs. We all have this life, and I don't know if there's anything after. I don't know if there's anything before. I don't know if there's a soul or if it's just all a grand coincidence. But what I do know is that I have this life, and they have that life. And if this is all we have, I want them to live it in the best way that they can. I feel that a plant-based lifestyle and a vegan ethics will benefit anyone because of the health benefits, the environmental benefits, a general empathy that you develop, and mindfulness when you step back and you decide to reject the ideas that you've been taught since your childhood, and you think about your actions, you think about the things you eat and the things you consume and how much of it you need. Veganism just is, for me, the best way that I've learned to apply mindfulness in every action that I perform.
Thank you so much. This is activism. Hopefully you will inspire a lot of people to at least think about going vegan, staying vegan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to be interviewed, please visit the Vegan Agenda on Facebook. Look for the flying pigs.
We will be featuring more interesting and inspiring vegans, so be sure to like, subscribe, and click that bell for notifications. If you want to help us promote veganism, please support the Vegan Agenda on Patreon.
We would love to hear from you. Please comment below to let us know your thoughts.
Thanks for watching.